This is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft chocolate, craft beer, and other artisan drinks. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional drinks writer, an advanced cicerone, the author of Pairing Beer and Chocolate, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or on annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. Hey everyone, welcome back to Bean to Barstool. In today's episode, I'm talking with Christopher Nobles of Piety Desire Chocolate out of New Orleans, Louisiana. Before we jump into that, a bit of housekeeping. If you love Bean to Barstool, you can help more people discover the show by leaving a review on your favorite podcast service. I will be very grateful to you for that. Also, as always, check out our online shop at beantobarstool.com to pick up a copy of my pairing book, as well as a bunch of other cool beer and chocolate zines and prints, including the new issue of Final Gravity. I went to New Orleans a very long time ago, actually pre-Katrina, one of the first trips I ever took without my parents. I was a freshman in college, and my roommate and I decided on a last-second road trip over our fall break. And a lot of my images of that trip are still so sharp and clear. My impression of the city was that it didn't feel like it could exist in the United States, like it existed in a parallel version of the US or in a foreign country. The buildings and foliage and cemeteries, it all felt like it was just draped in this decadent but elegant decay, but was all the more beautiful for it. I haven't been back, sadly, but would love to revisit it now after having seen a lot more of the world and see how the city has changed, but more importantly, how I've changed and how my impressions of a place change with that. Christopher Nobles is a lifelong New Orleans resident, and at Piety Desire Chocolate, he brings elegance and indulgence to his range of bars and confections, many of them in true Big Easy style, incorporating alcoholic beverages from some of the city's new generation of producers. We talk about the flavors of New Orleans, its personality, and how it all makes its way into his chocolate. Let's jump right in. Christopher, tell us about the name Piety and Desire. It's this very evocative, kind of poetic name for a chocolate company. What's the origin of that?
Oh, yeah, thanks. So first started trying to figure out a name for the chocolate company. I wanted something that reflected the history of, being from New Orleans. And, at that time it was tough to do something like that without coming up with something kind of cheesy, like there was a lot of NOLA pride, like after Katrina and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, this was like 10 years removed from that, but still there was a lot of that residual kind of cheesiness around like fleur-de-lis this, NOLA that, blah, blah, blah. One thing I started thinking about was all the unique street names we have here. And, one of those street names in the neighborhood I lived in, Desire, which is already a pretty famous street name for those literate amongst us. Maybe streetcar named Desire rings a bell.
Yeah.
And there's a parallel street right before it, which is Piety, which I thought was kind of funny, Piety and Desire. And then it felt like the perfect name because it, aside from referencing New Orleans, it also kind of references the history of cacao itself. Since going back thousands of years, it obviously had all these not only sacred but also secular uses, even before the Europeans perverted it with sugar and tales of lust. It was used as a currency while also being used for sacred things. So hence it's always been this object of both piety, something religious or spiritual, and desire, something secular. So
Love that. Well, I'm glad you brought up New Orleans. I'd love to
yeah.
hear a little bit more about how the city influences you. It's such an unusual place.
Oh yeah.
It's been a lot of years since I was there, but I remember feeling like it was the closest you could get to being in a foreign country without leaving the United States. It just felt like a place apart. Tell us a little bit about how the city influences you creatively.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there with saying that it's really not like any other U.S. city for sure. You can call it the northernmost point of the Caribbean, if you will. And just the influences here, obviously from just everyday life of the way we talk, the way we walk, down to our unique cuisines is going to influence what we make for sure. In fact, I'm almost embarrassed that there's like so many specific dishes and things that I've like left on the table, so to speak, that I haven't yet made into a chocolate bar or bonbon, but I will. But but so it's like there's so many just referencing what's already out there. And then I think most importantly, what kind of sets us apart, influences us as a New Orleans chocolate company is just the blessing of having the palate of a multi-generational New Orleanian. It sounds ridiculous, but I think it really translates into what we do and what we make. For instance, going back before I started making chocolate, I'd always been a fan of chocolate and specifically dark chocolate, and I never really cared for the confectionery part. Like I didn't really have like a sweet tooth per se. Like, of course, we all enjoy the occasional treat, but really enjoyed dark chocolate more as a savory thing. And a lot of that I feel like was because when I would occasionally try like a fancy bonbon or something from a place, even in like the hallowed grounds of Belgium, back in the
Mm.
day, and just, really didn't feel like it met the mark a lot of times for like what it was supposed to be. It was purported to be, this flavor bonbon or whatever, and it just kind of tasted mostly like, a diluted chocolate, so and I mean, it sounds like pretty basic, but I feel like, you could feel that same experience going to like lots of chocolatiers around the country and around the world where, it looks nice, but maybe it doesn't get there flavor
Yeah.
wise. And so yeah, I think just having that passion for flavor is just something inherent from being from here and being surrounded by and blessed by great food all my life. So,
Share with us some examples of some of those New Orleans flavors and dishes that you've been able to translate into chocolate.
oh, sure. One of our newest bars, I finally got around to making and launching our inclusion bars is like an actual like series finally. Occasionally we do like little limited releases and things like that, but like finally got some of them out there. And one of them that I'm most proud of is probably our cafe au lait at Beignet. So everyone that comes to New Orleans is told, you got to go to Cafe Du Monde and get the coffee and chicory and the beignets. And the beignets, it's at first glance, it's like it doesn't even sound like a big deal, right? It's fried dough with powdered sugar on it, but it's just the particulars of the type of oil that's used in the frying and just like the perfection of the dough and accented with the sugar. And again, being paired with the coffee and chicory, the cafe au lait specifically, which is a half and half mixture of coffee and chicory and steamed milk, actually really like burnt milk, honestly, which is like part of not just the charm, but like the flavor where it actually works together. Again, it's just, I mean, that in and of itself is like a nice little microcosm of like New Orleans flavor and culture there. It's like it's imperfect, but it is perfect. Like it just works. And so yeah, actually my least favorite bonbon we make is the cafe beignet, actually. Because it looks cute, but it's not supposed to taste like a beignet, but it looks like a beignet, which is kind of like funny. But it's like a dark chocolate coffee and chicory ganache inside a milk chocolate shell, and it's kind of a rounded square look. It looks just like a little beignet. It's super cute. But for me, it's like, well, I really want both the flavors and like was waiting, wanted to keep it as such because it also like wanted to, have something for the celiac folks out there that like don't get to enjoy beignets.
Sure.
Because it still gives that, it still evokes that flavor, even though there's no beignet in it. So it's kind of magical in that sense. But for me, I knew that like, well, we have this bar that like I've played around with, and like that's gonna be the one. And so yeah, we finally released that this year. And yeah, we take actual beignets from Cafe Du Monde and dry them out, basically turn them into little crunchy cracker bits and fold them into a chocolate that we make, which is a light milk, but it's a coffee and chicory chocolate, essentially. and it really does taste just like the coffee. It tastes just like the cafe au lait and just like the beignet together at one. And it's like now you can take it around the world, and enjoy it. You can take it back home with you when you visit New Orleans, and yeah, so
Yeah, that's great.
that's pretty cool.
Well,
Um,
obviously, one of the great things about chocolate is that it can be shipped or transported anywhere. So I know you have fans around the country and I'm
mm.
sure around the world. I'm curious what the reaction has been like right there in New Orleans to especially to some of these chocolates that are playing with those flavors that people are familiar with. How have the locals reacted to those?
We'll be right back.
Are you passionate about beer, dreaming of crafting the perfect brew? Cincinnati State's Brewing Science program is here to make that dream a reality. Imagine learning from some of the best in the world. Their faculty are seasoned pros with years of experience in the beer industry. You'll get hands-on training in their in-campus brewing lab, turning classroom concepts into award-winning creations. Cincinnati State offers an associate degree and several specialized certificates to tailor your education to your career goals. Whether you're just starting out or looking to deepen your expertise, they've got you covered. And they know life is busy. That's why their in-person classes are held in the evenings, perfect for those with full-time day jobs. And with some of their courses offered entirely online, you can brew up your future without being on campus every day. When you finish the program, their strong connections with local breweries mean you'll be set up for success in the job market. Make a choice for your future today. Visit cincinnati-state.edu/brewing for more information.
Oh, great. And it's funny because when I first started the business, I started first producing like 8 years ago commercially. And when I first opened up, my plan was to be like all the other craft chocolate makers out there and like make single origin bars, make inclusion bars, distribute them nationally, and like that kind of plan. And I had a greater plan for, after that, my plan was always to like partner with a pastry chef maybe to like make the bonbons. Because again, at that point, I didn't really have a big high hopes for like bonbons and confections in general. So what happened was there was this other local chocolate company who wasn't like making chocolate bean to bar or anything like that, but they were making little confections and things that went out of business like right when I was starting. And I went over there to get some small wares and things from them as they were selling off their stuff. And they had this, this confection case that they practically like made me take with me. And I was like, all right, well, I wasn't even planning on opening like a retail shop like at that point. I just outfitted this like 1,000 square foot little factory space and planned like, okay, I was gonna just do wholesale for a couple of years and then like open a little flagship store or whatever. But since I had this little case, I was like, well, if I'm gonna have this confection case, I might as well like use it and like produce a few bonbons and stuff. And so it was that, I just created a little line of I think like eight to 10 bonbons, just like real quick, and right before the Christmas season in 2017. And I just visited Chocolate ATL in Atlanta when they were in their little spot in the marketplace there. I forget the name of it, like Kroger Market or something like that. It was just like this really tiny little like storefront. And I was like, that's really all you need, right? So, I decided to just carve out this little 6 foot by 6 foot by 4 foot little space in the front of the factory with the case there, and people responded tremendously to the bonbons and flavors, and everything just kind of changed for me right there. And I was like, oh well, I think we need to pivot this way for a little bit, and like sure enough, that's kind of what we're more known for is our bonbons. I guess partly because there just wasn't much of anything like that in the city, but then also just because from what I'm told, we, stand toe to toe with the best of that kind of genre. And it's been interesting kind of, in the New Orleans, the local market in particular, like, people didn't really have much of a grasp of like bean to bar chocolate. And so like all the other bean to bar makers in the US, like taking that road of, educating folks was obviously a part of it and still is, even with like, people that, especially tourists and stuff that come through that maybe are from smaller towns in the South and stuff like that. But yeah, it's been a tremendous local response for sure.
Great. Well, obviously, the foundation and the star of great chocolate is great cacao. Tell us a
Mm.
little bit about your sourcing and how you go about working with different origins.
Sure. Yeah. As a matter of fact, one of the taglines I like to throw out is that like first and foremost, we're curators of cacao with character, because obviously you have to start with the best ingredients to make the best chocolates. And working with folks that produce that cacao is obviously important to everything we do. So whether it's working directly with farmers or co-ops or working with distributors that do like Uncommon and Meridian, and being able to work with the farmers and ensure that, everyone's getting paid a fair wage is obviously the utmost importance, as, most in the craft chocolate community would, attest to for
Mhm.
sure. And then I think it's also important to, identify and work with those cooperatives and farmers that are consistently showing up and like doing the quality work, right? And producing cacao that has like all cacao has its own personality, right? And it's nice to work with those that are bringing something interesting and unique to the table. And of course, at this point, a lot of people use some of the same sources for things, but it's always nice to find those that are doing something unique and or treat it a little bit differently if possible to, whether that's in our roasting or in our conching, especially our conching, I think sets us apart. Being able to dial in flavors that, are unique to the origin, but also unique to us as makers and what we're bringing to the table as well.
Well, for better or worse, New Orleans is often associated with indulgence or even excess in some cases. If you enjoy your adult drinks, it's one of those great destinations here in the US to go and enjoy what they've got to offer. We're going to talk in just a moment about a couple of bars that I've got in front of me here where you have worked with local alcohol producers. Before we do that, do you have a drink of preference? Kind of what is your relationship with what your city has to offer on the alcohol standpoint?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question, no pun intended, right? I really love exploring flavor. And so for me, that can come in a lot of different forms. And for me, that's kind of where my relationship with alcoholic beverages is the flavor of whether it be like individual spirits or individual ales or lagers or how they come together in a cocktail.
Mm,
So for me, it's kind of a cross reference of like what I'm looking for in the moment, to take me into the moment. Whether it's, if I'm at home after a long day, maybe I just want to have a nice Negroni. It's kind of like my go-to jam at home, usually a mezcal Negroni. Then, hanging out with friends, maybe enjoying some beers and talking about the flavors of those and how this brewery is developed and things like that, and kind of nerding out about that. So yeah, kind of a loaded
sure.
question.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Well, let's talk about the first of these bars, which is the Parlot Beer Bar 73% dark chocolate made with a beer local to you. We're going to talk all about this one, but first of all, introduce us to the brewery and your relationship to them.
Oh yeah, Love Parlow, a little brewery down in the Bywater neighborhood, which was where I had been living for about 17 years. Recently moved, but definitely one of my favorites. Although I love all the breweries in New Orleans, and we've had different relationships with others like NOLA and Urban South, to name a few, both in like pairing events and also in beer production as well.
Hmm,
But Parlo, we've partnered with a few times, not only in this beer that we made here, but also back in the day, made a fun bonbon. a double, I call it a double IPA because we made a hopped caramel
Mm,
on top of an IPA ganache. So,
nice.
and that was a fun one. And we actually took that concept and made it into a king cake back in the day. That was like pretty wild and popular. For those of you at home, that if you don't know what king cakes are, it's a carnival treat. So yeah, I really love what Parlo's doing down there, especially because they focus on crafting just like really great lagers, which to me is something that's not, I mean, I think a lot of breweries do focus on that, but especially in New Orleans, I feel like after the craft brewery boom here kind of took off like, you know, better late than never, like 10 years ago or something. I feel like they all kind of started strong the way that like most breweries were with like, focusing on IPAs and stuff. And then, Parish, located down a bayou and the Lafayette region, they, kind of became this big hit with their Ghost in the Machine beer, which
Mm-hmm.
gained them a lot of like national attention. It's a great brew, but then everybody just kind of chasing that, just like I mean, everyone. I feel like nationwide, everyone was kind of chasing the juicy IPAs, for a
Mm-hmm.
while, and then a little bit after that, I feel like people maybe once sales started dipping like a couple of years ago, breweries started kind of chasing after non-beer drinkers. I don't know if you see that nationally as much, but I feel like
Mm-hmm.
in New Orleans there was like a big push towards everyone making like milkshake sours
Yeah.
and then even getting into the hard seltzers and all this, just like chasing sales and things like that. And, one thing I really love about Parlo is that they didn't go that direction, they really just like stay true to making just real quality beers, whether it's exploring the genre of the lager or again doing like they have a great farmhouse ale program as
Mhm.
well. And yeah, pretty much everything they do is just really solid and great attention to detail. And it shows for sure.
That's awesome. Well, with this bar and the rum bar that we're going to talk about in just a minute, I love both of these because there's two sides to these collaborations. You've got the bars that you made, but then
Mm.
each of those producers made a beverage using your cacao as well. Tell us about the beer side of this collaboration. We'll talk more about the bar after that.
Yeah, so Parlor made this great barrel-aged imperial stout, and for that they used a whopping 100 pounds of nibs, which is quite a lot, compared to, we had done other collabs in the past, and usually I think, before that, I think the biggest usage of nibs was like 20 something pounds or whatever. So 100 pounds is like quite a lot of nibs. And we had, done some samples with them, like, sent them samples of like various nibs that we were working with at the time. And what we landed on with this one was a mix of 60 pounds of nibs that came from the Gola Rainforest group in Sierra Leone
Hmm.
and 40 pounds of nibs from Piura. It was the nice like Piura Blanca strain that was going around a lot back then, and which we were using both of those kind of in an inverse proportion along with something else, I believe at the time in a blend for our couverture that we were making. And so we'd given them samples of those and a few other nibs, and they really liked those and wanted to kind of focus on more of the chocolatey, fudgy stuff that comes out of the Sierra Leone. And so they took, 100 pounds of those nibs, a bunch of hazelnuts and vanilla beans, and put them in old rabbit hole barrels,
Mm-hmm.
which I love because that's a really great distillery, not local distillery, but they make really great bourbons and rye and things. Aged it, and what came out was really fantastic. Really great example of a bourbon, barrel aged imperial stout for sure. Super complex. In fact, I just reopened one of my last remaining. I still have like 6 cans or so of it, and yeah, revisited it last night in anticipation of the conversation to see how it held up to my memory and all that. And Yeah, still tastes fresh as daisy. Really great, really complex. You get all the great chocolatey notes out of it too. But then there's also lovely fruitiness to it, real bright like cherry and a little bit of fig to it. Really lovely. And yeah, what I really love about the chocolate that we made from it after the fact, we obviously like took the nibs back, dried them out, and then re-refined them as usual. And what was super interesting is just the way that the flavor profile just totally flipped. Because like I said, at the time we had been using this blend as kind of like the cornerstone of our couverture at the time. And the beans from Pura, we had some harvests where it was really nice and fruity. This particular harvest wasn't in that camp at all. It was really more of a nutty, caramelly, really like light chocolate flavor, right? And so I fully expected like, a very like dark, nutty, brooding type of chocolate to emerge from this post brew chocolate. And quite the contrary. It's like quite a wild tropical fruit
Mm.
ride with obviously some like really interesting like yeasty notes, really nice breadiness from the beer, which is just a real trip for sure.
Yeah, no, I
And
agree. When I tasted it, if I didn't know, I know you say on the back it's an imperial stout, I would not have guessed that that's what these nibs had come out of. There
right,
can be with a lot of beer infused chocolates that are typically, working with a stout, a sort of sameness, and it can be a
mm,
delicious sameness, but
right,
there's not a whole lot of nuance. And this does have a lot of delicacy and a lot of what I would consider fermentation character, which usually gets lost, I
right.
find, when you're taking those nibs back and turning them into a bar.
Yeah, indeed. Like I kind of postulate that like maybe it had kind of re-fermented in some
Mm,
strange way and kind of become this other cacao. I don't know if that's really possible post
mm,
roasting and all
yeah.
that, but it's definitely completely changed character. And so much so that like I mean, I guess I've had some 73s that taste sweeter, but this tastes like way sweeter than
Hmm.
a
Yeah,
73% dark chocolate, I feel like.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, super interesting experiment in that regard.
What did you do relative to your normal process in terms of like conching time? It feels like maybe a lot of those delicate flavors did not get blown off as much as they might have.
Correct. Yeah, we definitely took it easy on the conch because obviously I was super surprised and thrilled to find like all these super wild fruit notes coming out of it. And, so obviously to retain that, we wanted to keep most of the acidity in there. So we conched it pretty gently for sure. Not like the least that we've ever conched something, but definitely lighter. And we do use a standalone conch, by the way, which is something, which is surprising that like I mean, I guess at this point maybe more makers do, but I've always been surprised that like, a lot of people don't have standalone conches and, you know, just kind of prefer to, somewhat conch in melangers and stuff. But yeah.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, you may have noticed things in the world aren't awesome right now, and social media kind of reflects that. I built a lot of the following for Bean to Barstool and just for my own writing career on Instagram, but I've been getting significantly lower returns in terms of engagement on Instagram, and well, some of their recent changes don't have me thrilled for the future. So, here are some ways to keep up with Bean to Barstool if Instagram and other social media platforms don't prove to be long-term viable solutions. If you do nothing else, sign up for the Bean to Barstool newsletter. You can do that by going to beantobarstool.com/newsletter-sign up. That link is in the show notes. That is a weekly email newsletter that covers all the same things we cover here on the podcast. Speaking of, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Wherever you listen to Bean to Barstool, go there and subscribe to make sure you get notifications of new episodes. If you're a proud millennial like me and you still use an RSS feeder, you can also subscribe to our blog posts, which come out at least weekly. Also, if you are still on social media but don't love Meta right now, you can check me out over on Blue Sky. I'm on there under my personal account at David Nilsson Beer, but I do post all the Bean to Barstool content over there as well. Finally, if you want to get in touch with me directly, you can email beantobarstool@gmail.com. I am not leaving Instagram anytime soon, but these are great ways to make sure you can keep up with what I have going on. Stay safe and take care of each other. Do you have plans or ideas floating around your head for other collaborations with either this brewery or others?
Sure. We still have like a ton of chocolate. So there's that. Because one nice thing is that we're saving all of it for bars. But yeah, always open to further collaboration and new brews for sure. And we don't have anything in the works for a new beer, but we have continuously made the rum bar the rum liqueur is like continuing to be made like commercially, constantly. And I actually just got some nibs back from them and redid that, but I guess we're jumping ahead to the next bar now.
No, that was the next thing I was going to ask. We're
Mm.
looking at the Roulaison rum bar. You mentioned New Orleans being the northernmost point of the Caribbean. Rum certainly feels appropriate to that. Tell us a little bit about your relationship to this distillery, and then we'll talk about the bar itself.
They're like our brothers right next door for sure. Because they actually started like just a few months before us in the same building as us, technically.
Hmm.
We're kind of it's almost like a separate building because like back in the day it was like a standalone garage, like a commercial garage or something. And then at some point it was like connected by this hallway. And so yeah, right down the hall we have this a fantastic award-winning distillery, Roulaison Rum. It's buying, obviously starting off with local molasses and also juice, cane juice as well, because they do a great agricole rum as well. But yeah, they have a fantastic pot still distillation operation going on over there. And, we've been collaborating with them since the very beginning. As a matter of fact, like the very first sales of like commercial Piety and Desire Chocolate stuff was for their like, grand opening, which, at that point I had only been in the building for like a couple months and had just made like first batch of chocolate or whatever. And so, was there at the grand opening party selling like, selling bars of chocolate with no packaging, obviously, except for little sleeves or whatever. And some appropriately named Care rum mells made with their flagship crystal rum, which I fell in love with immediately because I had dabbled in chocolate making for years before that, and had played with different rums in making ganaches and caramels and things like that. But it was like immediately clear that like the character from this pot stilled clear rum was just beyond anything else I had had, and like you could actually taste that it was their rum, which was like the first time I had experienced that, as opposed to, in previous trials with different things. I'd been like, well, yeah, you can taste that there's rum in there, but like you couldn't say it was like this rum or that rum or what distillery it came, let alone what distillery it came from. But with this, it's like, wow, you got all the nice tropical notes that are in that rum, which again, and we're talking about a clear rum, not an aged rum at all, unaged. And it was just, yeah, beautiful from the beginning. So when I first, when we made our first handful of bonbons for that impromptu, unplanned foray opening into the retail realm, one of the first ones we had for sure was the Roulaison Tiki Bar, we called it. And yeah, it's just, their rum. And Angostura and another local bitter. Well, now it's not local anymore. Bitterman's got bought by the Sazerac company. They're fantastic bitters, and they had started here. They're tiki bitters, dark chocolate ganache, and it's still one of my favorites. It's so good. So yeah, we've been partnering with them from the beginning, and a few years back, Andrew over there, he's the head distiller, was saying, look, we want to start doing like a line of liqueurs, kind of like with local things. And obviously, you guys being right down the hall and making this great product, we want to, use your nibs and come up with this like cacao liqueur. I was like, okay, great, and gave them some samples of different things. We decided to roll with something fruitier and rolled with, our friends, the Coco Cameli beans. Everybody knows and loves those.
Mm-hmm.
From the beginning, it was just an amazing product that they came out with because it was it's unlike any other kind of cacao or chocolate liquor on the market because they didn't go to the chocolate side at all. They kind of wanted to just like highlight the fact that this was coming from cacao and highlighting that like we were starting from cocoa beans. And so they created this liqueur that's really almost more in like the aperitif or digestif mode. Not quite like Amari thickness, but it reminds me kind of an Amaro or a Genevieve almost, in that there's like this like complexity and bitterness to it. But it is a liqueur, so it's sweetened using the same Louisiana sugar, obviously, that they're producing it from, which is cool. And obviously the next step was, well, yeah, let's, take these nibs back and like make some chocolate out of it. And this was done like years ago before we did the beer one. And before we ever did like our inclusion bar releases or whatever, we were just like releasing this as like a limited thing for years. And we have a lot of fun with it. We kind of like proof it down, if you will, using our Coca Chameleon like 70% to kind of create kind of like a rum old fashioned type of vibe and kind of make it something a little bit more unique than just rum in a chocolate. Although that's a super fun, flavor as well. And they've asked, and we will oblige them. Andrew, if you're listening, I'll make it soon. With they've requested that we give them an uncut version as well. So yeah, we'll get that barrel proof version, if you will,
I like that. Yeah.
too.
Cask strength. Yeah. I like that idea, especially tasting them side by side. I'd be curious to see the distinction there. Yeah, you
Hmm.
mentioned the old fashioned. Coco Cameli can have a little bit of that red fruit cherry note to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a fun contrast. I wish more American distilleries would work with cacao in a thoughtful way like that. You
Hmm.
get some, like you mentioned, very chocolatey, I don't want to say gimmicky, but just kind of like sweet treat type of spirits and things like that. But using it more as a botanical, as a
Mm.
tropical ingredient like it is
Oh yeah,
something
for
I
sure.
wish would catch on more.
Oh yeah.
You talked a little about the process of taking those back, those nibs back with the beer bar. Was there any difference in how you worked with those with the rum bar, or was it more or less the same process?
More or less the same. We did kind of air out our rum nibs a little bit more, maybe, before drying them in the ovens, because they were like, obviously the alcohol content is way higher. So there's definitely a fear of putting them in an electronic or an electric
Oh, sure.
oven and like creating
Huh.
a bomb.
Yeah, I didn't think about
So
that.
obviously, I mean, for both, we like, have to like dry them using just like fans outdoors or semi-outdoors, indoors, but with the door open. Because yeah, definitely a lot of ethanol coming off of that. So obviously, for the rum one, it's a lot more potent. So definitely a little bit more drying time before. Definitely a lot more pre-drying before the drying, official drying in the oven time. But yeah, both were pretty similar in approach in the drawing and re-refining. We conched this one like a little bit harder though, I would say, but still not too much, but definitely more so because we knew we were gonna like cut it with the straight ahead Cocoa Chameleon 70% chocolate. So we weren't like there wasn't like so much fruitiness that we're like trying to hold on to, and we're really just trying to like balance the flavor a little bit more as on its own as like the uncut cast strength, if you will, rum chocolate. So yeah, definitely, yeah. Main differences would be more pre-drying and then a little heavier hand in the conching.
That makes sense. Well, this could be its own entire conversation. So, just briefly, you mentioned pairing a little bit ago. Do you have any reflections from experiences with pairing your bars with some of these different beverages?
Oh, sure. Love pairings paired with everything from, rum, Relays on rum, I feel like every brewery locally, pretty much, we've done pairings with at some point or another. And we used to have a standing one at the Sazerac house for a while, which was nice.
Mm.
And then obviously with wine, worked with a few different purveyors in that regard. And our friends down at St. James Cheese
Mm.
locally, which are probably some of my favorites, because then it's like a three-way pairing where we're pairing the chocolate with various cheeses, but then also usually wines. Although we also worked with last year, we did one with them and Pinhook, which makes some really great bourbons and ryes. And yeah, obviously every spirit and every category kind of brings its own thing to the table. I find that like it's fun also that being a producer of not just chocolate, but also bonbons, playing off of those different things and seeing how, different flavors translate along different categories and different preparations, be it like, a spirit, how does a spirit pair versus a cocktail, and how does that then get cross-referenced with uh, straight ahead solid chocolate versus an inclusion bar or a bonbon, and just kind of exploring that dichotomy of flavor is always just so much fun for
Yeah,
sure.
endless complexity there.
Yeah.
Well, the last question I always ask is about the story you're telling with your chocolate. What story is Piety and Desire telling?
Yeah, so I feel like I kind of already jammed out on this in the beginning with talking about the influence of New Orleans, So I feel like that's what really defines us and sets us apart from everything else that's out there, is just coming from this catalog of flavor and culture, and how that influences what we make and how we make it and where we end up in that journey in the end.
Like Christopher and I were discussing, the Parlo beer bar does not come across like it was made with a big burly stout. It's nutty and malty with some notes of caramel, more sweet, lightly toasted brioche than roasty, but just a little bit of that roast emerges as it warms. This is one of the more unique beer bars I've tried, especially considering it was made with imperial stout. The rum bar reminded me initially of a fruit roll-up with bright dried fruit notes, and then it deepened and broadened into molasses, raisin, even a bit of oak with some floral and baking spice notes as it melted further. Both of those bars are fascinating, and you can order those and others at pietyandDesireChocolate.com, which I'll link in the show notes. The World Beer Cup was held a few weeks back in conjunction with the Craft Brewers Conference, which I attended in Indianapolis. So I'll share the winners of the chocolate beer category with you real quick. So the gold medal went to Chocolate Porter by Diatribe Brewing. They are in Asheville, North Carolina. I suspect they are using French Broad chocolate cacao nibs, but I haven't been able to confirm that. Silver was Viator Obscura Triple Chocolate by Wandering Monsters Brewing in Cincinnati. My friend Jason Brewer is a founder there and a Final Gravity subscriber. They're using cocoa powder and nibs, but I have not been able to ask him about the source for that. I will track it down. And then the bronze went to River North Midnight Hike out of Denver. That's an Imperial Porter. The last information I had was that they were using Ecuador nibs from Cho Chocolate, which is a very common producer for brewers, because the Brewer Supply Group, which is a major brewing ingredient supplier, uses Cho nibs to distribute to their customers. So You can find out more about Piety and Desire Chocolate and find links to their website and social media in the show notes. Thanks to Christopher for coming on the show today, and thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.